Welcome to the Bronx African American History Project. My name is Steven Payne, librarian and archivist at the Bronx County Historical Society, and I'm here today with Jane McKenzie Poindexter, who grew up in the Coops, or the United Workers Cooperative Colony, located at 2700 Bronx Park East. So we begin these oral history interviews by asking, Jane, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family and how they ended up in the Bronx, at least as far as you know?
Yeah, I actually don't. We were living on the Lower East Side, um, and then at some point, I was about 4 years old, I think. We moved to the Bronx. I have no reason. I don't know what the reason was. It certainly was a larger apartment, but my mother actually never wanted to live in the Bronx. She always wanted to live in Manhattan.
Mm.
But there we were. Um,
Yeah. And do you have any memories of living on the Lower East Side, or that's all just kind of too young to remember that?
I have very vague recollections, mostly about the apartment, and being punished and being angry and knocking a hole in the wall with my toy hammer. I remember that very vividly. But no, I remember there was a woman who took care of me when my mother and father went to work, and I remember her very well. And that's about all I remember of the Lower East Side.
Yeah, yeah. And what are some of your earliest memories of the Bronx?
Um, Oh, I remember I got lost the first day we got there. My mother let me go downstairs to play, and then I couldn't find the apartment again. Um, but I don't have any particular memories, early memories.
Sure. Um, and what would you like to share about either of your parents? Their names, for instance, or anything you might know about their background, their families, really anything about them.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, my mother was Jewish, and my father was black. He was from Guyana, which is the northern tip of South America. My mother was raised in various cities in New Jersey.
Mm.
Um, she worked for the Department of Welfare, and I believe that's where she met my father. But I can't be sure about that.
Sure.
Um, and then for a while, he had a hard time finding work.
Mm.
Um, he was a very smart man, very intelligent, very, very verbal. But because he was black, he had a hard time
Absolutely.
finding work. Um, he ended up many years later, I guess I was in my teens, my mother's father, was it her father? Somebody in her family died and left her $10,000,
Mm.
um, which was a lot of money at the time.
Yeah.
And my father was able to buy a taxi medallion,
Mm.
which now costs, from what I understand, over $1 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But he for $10,000 you got it, and that's what he did. He drove a taxi in New York City, and my mother worked for the Department of Welfare. I don't guess it's called that anymore. For many, many years, she worked. Her last job for them was working in Children's Center in East Harlem, where she worked with locating the families of runaways.
Oh, I see.
And yeah, and she was quite good at that. She also was a very smart woman and also very, very articulate. Yeah, that was them.
Yeah, yeah. Did either of their were either of their families around very much when you were growing up?
Well, my mother's family disowned her,
Mm.
and I did not get to meet her side of the family until I was an adult. It was at the instigation, actually, of, let me see, my mother's brother's children, my cousins,
Yeah.
who made contact. And I'm very close with one of them, and I know all of them, and I'm very fond of them. They're really very decent people, and not very much like their parents.
Sounds like it.
No, yeah, I like them a lot. On my father's side, I knew his mother. Ella Christiani was her name. She was very formidable. She was a devout Catholic, which my father was not. He hated the church.
Yeah.
And she would tell me stories about how God was going to burn up all the bad people on earth.
Oh, God.
And take all the good people with him up to heaven or somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was a story that puzzled me enormously because I couldn't figure out if he was so good, why he would do that. It sounded like a terrible thing to do.
Yeah.
So I pondered on that for many years of my young life. But she was a very old-fashioned woman. She was very strict, quite severe. Yeah. She did not have much of a sense of humor. And she lived with a family that I don't believe I'm related to.
Oh, okay.
So I called them Aunt Estelle and Uncle Johnny, and they had 2 children. They had 3 children, actually, Carmen and Audrey and Roy, whom I adored. I loved that family. They were just lovely, lovely people. And Roy died at an early age, in his 40s, I think, of alcoholism.
Oh, wow.
And the 2 girls lived to a ripe old age. They're dead now. They were about my mother's age. And I sort of lost contact with them as an adult.
Sure.
But I loved going to visit them. They were just lovely people.
And were they from Guyana as well?
Well, of course, my father's mother was. Sure. And they, I don't know whether they were from Guyana or from Trinidad. A lot of folks from Guyana went to Trinidad and then came to the United States. So I'm not sure where Aunt Estelle and Uncle Johnny were born. Their children were born in the United States.
Sure.
But they did have a West Indian accent.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So they were not born in the States, but I'm not sure where.
Now, did you all ever go to say any distant relatives in Guyana? Did you ever visit?
No. No, I think my mother might have once gone. I've never had any desire to go to Guyana. There have been places in South America that I have wanted to visit, and about 2 years ago I did get to Colombia.
Oh, wow.
But no, I don't. I think, that's where Jonestown was, if you recall.
Yeah.
Remember? Yeah, and I just think I guess my mother was always so negative about it that I never had any desire to go there. She just said it was hot and humid, and
I'm sure it's
so. Yeah. I think she went once.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they disposed of my grandmother's ashes off of a boat over there or something. I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah. Um, yeah, this is going off topic for a second, but the first black state assemblyman in the Bronx is actually from Guyana as well.
Is that right?
Yeah, Walter Gladwin.
What's his name?
Walter Gladwin.
What's Gladwin?
Yeah. He was elected in 54, I think, 53, 54.
Okay.
But yeah, so anyway, but yeah, what about go ahead.
Let me add something.
Sure.
About my mother's side of the family, because it is her mother actually would come and visit, my mother's mother.
Okay, I see.
And so her father never did. And neither did her brother or sister.
Wow.
But the mother came, and whenever she came, there was such tension in the house.
I bet. Yeah.
Because she would refer to my father as Mr. McKenzie, and he would refer to her as Mrs. Byron. And would you pass the salt, please? Thank you so much. I mean, it was so formal and very, very tense.
I bet.
But yeah, she would come and actually spend a weekend.
Okay.
And I rather liked it when she came. I mean, there was not much interaction between the two of us, but she would always bring me a Hershey bar, and my mother didn't allow me to have candy. So that was kind of, a thrill.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to your parents for a little bit, what are things that they did outside of work, whether it's, listen to music or go places, or, if they were political, just some of the things they did outside of work?
Yeah, well, my mother mostly worked.
Sure.
That's what she did.
Yeah.
She was big on cleaning and ironing and cooking. And my father, my mother was political, but she wasn't active politically.
Yeah.
And my father was very political. I don't know if you know about this trip that that some black people took in the 30s to the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Ostensibly to make, well, he was on that trip.
Yeah.
And
a picture of him with Hughes and, the whole group. I've seen some photos, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, he had a girlfriend over there. This was before actually he married my mother, and he had a girlfriend, and they had a son.
Oh.
And I don't know him.
Yeah.
And then of course, I mean, he came back and, married my mother at some point. They met and got married.
Sure.
And I remember he had a sort of a loose leaf book, and it had a picture of this woman that he was involved with in the Soviet Union. Her name was either something like Tanya or Sonia, something like that. Yeah. Very beautiful woman, actually. And there were some letters from her. And when he and my mother separated many, 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 many years later, she threw that away.
Yeah. I don't blame her.
So she just took them and threw it away. And I remember I went looking for it one day, and she told me, no, she threw it away. I said, okay. Oh, my mother was one of these lefties who, if she didn't like you,
yeah,
or you got on her bad side, excuse me, she would automatically believe that you were an FBI agent. It was so. She got to believe that my father had been an FBI agent, which I seriously doubt. But yeah.
Yeah.
My mother was very good at developing a hate, and it's funny because she was a very sweet woman and very kind.
Yeah.
But boy, if you got on her bad side, there was no forgiveness for you in the future. I could tell you that.
I was gonna ask about this later, but since you brought it up already, do you remember FBI agents harassing your family growing up at all?
I do.
Yeah.
This is one of my fondest memories of my mother. One day, this is when we lived in the Coops.
Yeah.
And the doorbell rang. And I was very young. I don't think my sister had been born yet, which means I was under 7 or under. And I answered the door. And there were these 2 tall men, white men, with hats and suits and overcoats, looking very, impressive. And they asked, to speak to, one of my parents, and I called my mother, and she came to the door. And they said, I remember this so clearly, they said, do you consider yourself a good American? And my mother slammed the door in their face, and they left. She wasn't standing for that.
Yeah. I've heard a few stories of people doing similar things around the Coops already. So yeah.
Well, you've talked to Judy Winston, right?
Yeah.
I don't know her married name. Well, as a teenager, I always knew where her mother was.
Yeah.
I would walk home from school, and I would see the FBI car.
Yeah.
So I knew she was either in the butcher shop or the corner grocery store. They followed Edna Winston everywhere.
Yeah. And
everywhere.
Try to hide it.
No, I mean, no. No. I don't know if Judy remembers any of that, but I certainly, because she was a baby.
Yeah, she
very young.
yeah. Um, but yeah, it's
But
I don't know if you've ever tried to pull either of your parents' FBI files. I'm sure they have them. Um, but I've looked at Angie's FBI file before, and it just makes your skin crawl to see all of the, literally any movement she made appears on in this file. It's, sickening. But
really,
yeah,
no, I never tried. I can tell you this story. When my mother, it was during the McCarthy era.
yeah,
And my mother worked for the, Department of Welfare. And McCarthy was getting ready to investigate city government.
yeah,
And my mother was terrified that she would lose her job.
yeah.
And what she did was she took maternity leave. She got some left-wing commie doctor to say that she was pregnant.
Wow, that's very.
And she took maternity leave, hoping that since, she was not there, they would simply overlook her.
Yeah.
And they did.
Wow.
And she said the worst part of it was coming back, and she told people, that she had miscarried.
Yeah, yeah.
And she said the worst thing was people commiserating with her, saying how sorry they were.
Yeah.
That she had lost the baby. She said it was really difficult.
I bet.
But that's how she saved her job.
Yeah, and she might have even. I know that there were definitely legal cases brought against people who had government jobs. If there was any question on the application, which there often was, have you at this are you now, or have you ever
Right.
a communist? And I imagine that your mother probably would have put no, like most people did, regardless. And
Right.
yeah.
Right.
But
yeah. No. No, she wasn't going to fill out that application.
yeah,
She was not.
yeah, for sure. So do you remember much about the kinds of political activities, either in the neighborhood or wider New York City, that your family would go to?
Well, I tell you, for me, the best part of growing up in the Coops were the political discussions that went on in my apartment. And I don't know if anybody has ever mentioned to you Alberto Moreau.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he and my father were really good friends. And they would have these political arguments that would go on for hours.
Yeah.
And I was always fascinated by them. And I think for me, the best thing about growing up was this notion that the world could be a better place and would be a better place.
Yeah.
That the workers would unite and throw out all the bad capitalists that were making a profit off of their labor.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And I just think I felt so hopeful for the future of the United States.
Yeah.
And I guess I had in my mind some sort of a utopian notion of what the country would be like once they threw out those capitalists. And of course, there were many arguments which I think now were hilarious about how many years before the revolution came. That's what a lot of the arguments were about. Would it be 2 years or 5 years? Yeah, well, we're still waiting. I hate to tell you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
but there were always political discussions when anybody came to the house, and I loved those discussions, and yeah, they were fun.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes we lived on the 5th floor because and I'm sure all Black people lived on the top floor except for Angie.
Yes, that's what I have learned very quickly.
And coming up the stairs, I would stop and try and hear if there were people in the house arguing. Because if they were, I would get very excited about that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
And, my father was a very good debater.
Sure.
And so, yeah.
Did they ever
that
invite you to participate in the discussions?
No, I was too young, and no, they never did. I was young.
Yeah.
And I would just listen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I don't remember much. Let me see. I don't remember a whole lot of political activity.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was, because they would go to meetings. I don't know where the hell these meetings were, but they would go to meetings. Oh yeah, and then there was the American Labor Party.
Yeah.
Which I really think was the Communist Party, but I can't be sure. And I just don't remember. And I remember they were running Vito Marcantonio for president. I do remember that.
Oh my God!
And I remember.
I can't imagine if
they had
won.
and they had the American Labor Party had some sort of headquarters on Allerton Avenue, somewhere upstairs. I do remember that.
Yeah. It's a church now.
I also remember. Wow, I've forgotten all about this. Selling subscriptions as a kid to the Daily Worker.
Oh yeah.
I don't. Where the hell did I sell them to? I don't know. Yeah, but I sold them, and I think I sold more than anybody else.
Wow.
And I got to meet Paul Robeson.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And I remember they told Paul, or somebody, my father probably, told Paul Robeson that I had sold more Daily Workers than anybody else, something like that. Yeah. So, yeah.
Did Paul Robeson come to your apartment, or you met him someplace else?
I think I met him at the American Labor Party's headquarters on Allerton Avenue. I think he was there.
Yeah.
My memory is really fuzzy on this, so.
I know he was there at least once, but probably more than that. So, yeah. And do you remember ever going to like Yankee Stadium to picket the Jim Crow going on with the Yankees?
Yeah, I remember that whole movement. I don't remember myself picketing.
Yeah.
I was a big Dodger fan because of Jackie Robinson.
Absolutely.
And so I don't remember picketing. I do remember that there were protests about the Yankees not having any black ball players, but I myself don't remember. I remember May Day.
Yeah.
I was absent every May Day from kindergarten to the end of high school.
Yeah.
And I loved May Day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just loved it. There were thousands of people out on the street.
Yeah.
And that sense of camaraderie and making the world a better place, and was for me as a young person. I also, on my own, I think it was Union Square. There was a big rally the night they executed the Rosenbergs.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I went by myself down to Union Square. I think it was Union Square. And they were executed at midnight. And there were thousands of people that were at that rally.
Wow.
And I think the mirror poles were there with the two kids.
Yeah, wow.
Their two children. It was quite moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, growing up there, the best thing was, the politics. I liked the politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
this, this notion of fighting for a better world is really a good notion to have as a kid. That you can make a difference.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was good.
Do you remember ever hearing much about, just to ask a couple other specific questions about things that were fights that were going on in the Bronx? Do you remember ever hearing much talk about Parkchester?
No, I don't.
Yeah, it was one of these large housing developments from Metropolitan Life Insurance,
Yeah.
and they it was
weren't renting to blacks.
yeah.
Was that it?
Not until 1968 when the state of New York forced them to, but it was built in 1939. So yeah, but there was
I go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I know there was definitely activity around that, around the Yankees. I think Angie organized a couple things at A&Ps around the Bronx that were either not were either hiring only white people or discriminating in other ways against black people. But yeah, it's really been a mixed bag as to whether or not people were participating in more local political struggles or just wider kind of New York City.
I'm not aware of all of Angie's, activities. My mother and Angie were best friends for many, many years.
Oh.
And Angie used to take care of me when I was, a really little girl.
Yeah.
And Angie was a force to be reckoned with, but she was very good to me.
Yeah.
And I liked being in her company, and I liked going to her house.
Yeah.
And then she and my mother, had a falling out.
Oh.
And she called my mother a racist, and my mother got really pissed off.
Yeah.
And so that was the end of that friendship.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always, the whole race thing in the Coops was just, it just permeated everything, I think.
Yeah.
I remember there was a woman by the name of Rose Falzak, she, a Jewish woman, married, 2 children, and I used to babysit for her kids. And I remember there was some function that was going on. I guess Angie was participating and Rose was helping out. And Rose asked Angie if she needed a towel to clean up this space where they were holding the event.
Yeah.
And I'm standing there, and I heard this with my own ears. She asked for a towel, and Angie started screaming at her, "The only reason you think I have a towel is because I'm black," which I thought was hysterical. I mean, black people do have towels. I can vouch for that. But I mean, it was just, and basically, I mean, the Jewish community, you know, it was predominantly a Jewish community. They were not terribly hospitable.
Yeah.
And I used to hear the women, it used to make me so mad. They would have, you know, a woman that would come in to clean their house once a day, I don't know, once a week, whatever. And they would refer to her as my girl. My girl is coming today.
Yeah.
And it was so infuriating.
Yeah.
And that was another thing that bewildered me as a young person. I couldn't understand how Jewish people who had suffered so much could be racist.
Yeah.
It just, it didn't compute. I couldn't figure it out. I still can't.
Yeah.
And it was just very odd to me. I mean, I've lived in that building for so many years, and none of those Jewish neighbors ever spoke to me. And not hello, not even a hello.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, yeah.
And along with that, I'm sure they obviously never invited you or your sister or I imagine your parents into their apartments. Is that right?
Never.
Yeah.
No, there was one woman, Mrs. Lubau, who was crazy, who lived on the 2nd floor. And the rumor had it do I want this on tape? I don't. No, I don't.
Okay.
Okay. It's a bit of gossip that is or is not true, so I don't want it.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mrs. Lubau lived on the 2nd floor, and for some reason, she had 2 daughters, Sheila and Brina. Occasionally, when my mother was working late or something, I would go there for dinner. But she was very cold. She was a very cold woman. I can't say it was only to me. She seemed that way with her own daughters. She's also quite glamorous, which was not true of the other ladies in the Coops.
Yeah.
Except the black people were the most elegant people living in the Coops. I can tell you that.
I've heard that.
The Branfords, absolutely. So yeah.
So
no, they never.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to repeat myself. No, they just never spoke. They were totally inhospitable.
Yeah. I mean, to put all the black families on the top floor, I think says everything you need to say about.
I know. Yeah.
Their thoughts were, I mean, you know, one person joked, little did they know they were doing us a favor because we didn't catch asthma because we were on the top floor.
I'm sorry, that went over my head. Who said what?
So Brenda was joking. She said, little did
Oh,
we know that the white people did us a favor by putting us on the top floor because I never got asthma, unlike some people below.
uh,
uh,
oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
but she was making a joke out of it, of course. Um, but yeah. So do you remember if your parents were very close with some of the black families in the Coops, aside from, you already mentioned Angie, of course, but
Yeah, my father remained very good friends with Angie even after my mother and Angie fell out.
okay, I see.
But I mean, all my friends, I was friends with Carl Jurgens,
Yeah,
and I was friends with Eloise Jurgens,
sure.
and then my I don't know if anybody ever mentioned Jean and Floyd James to you. They were a black family, and they had two children, Carol and Sharon. And I was very good friends with Carol. Jean and Floyd are dead, and Carol died several years ago.
Mm,
Her sister lives in Texas. Um, and those were my friends. And let me think. Um, yeah, they didn't have a whole bunch of friends. I mean, they had, some political people who would come by,
yeah.
and there was another family there, the Lawlers. I don't know if anybody's mentioned them to you. That probably forgotten about them, but it was Gwen and I can't remember the father's name. Lawler. She was white and he was black, and they had two children, Judy and Bobby. And then Gwen and her husband separated. I can't remember his name. Um, and Gwen was a nervous wreck. I mean, I don't know what her problem was, but she was wound tight.
Mm,
And he was um, much more relaxed and very good looking man. And they'd separated. And then anybody ever mention them to you?
no, no.
They,
I remember now
yeah,
with Sharon Jones, with the last family that you mentioned. Someone mentioned her, but none of the other
James, Sharon James, yeah.
James.
Well,
Yeah,
Judy, yeah, I don't. Judy just sort of, I just disappeared as an adult.
yeah.
I understood she got married to a man who was much older
Mm,
and had about 4 or 5 kids from his first marriage, and that's all I ever heard about her. And I don't know what happened to Gwen or Judy's brother Bobby.
yeah,
The
yeah.
Lawlers, yeah.
That
So my mother was friends with Gwen
okay.
for a while, and but they were never really close friends.
Yeah.
And regarding the other black families, I have to say no. I mean, all as I say, all my friends were black, but I don't know who they hung out with. I don't know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I don't know what they were doing. I don't know.
Yeah. Um, what about do you remember ever meeting the Du Bois family? They might have pronounced it differently, because I think they were from one of the s- one of the French speaking Caribbean islands. I don't know which one, but the father was a dentist.
They lived in the coops.
Yeah, I think the father's name might have been Dr. Vernon Du Bois, maybe. And it was a pretty large family, like maybe five children, six children, something like that. Um, they at least lived in the Coops in 1940. They might have moved out shortly after that. They probably didn't want to put up with the nonsense they had that they had to put up with. Um, but I've been
No, well, if they see, I was born. Let me see, in '37,
yeah
and we moved to the Coops when I was about 4, because I hadn't started kindergarten yet.
yeah
So that would have been 41.
yeah.
Oh, oh, did they used to live in Angie's apartment?
Yes. I think they did. That's right. Because I saw on the census they had one of the more expensive apartments, um, uh, and I think it was Angie's apartment.
Okay. I was yeah, I do, yeah, I do remember them, and they were a lovely family.
Yeah,
And um, I remember they had 2 boys, and I don't remember their names, and they also had a daughter. If they had more than that, I don't know. But the 2 boys, they were much older than me, or they were teenagers, and I just thought they were old. I don't know.
I think
But
they
we
were.
used to play this. Oh my God, I remember we used to play elevator.
Wow. Let me see there. I
we
have
used
the
to
name.
get in.
Let me see.
We used to get in the closet, and they would say, "Okay, the elevator's going up now." And I swear to you, I felt the elevator move. I
Wow.
was a little kid, and then they say, "Okay, now we're going down," and I could feel it going down. I loved going over there. Yeah,
Let's see.
yeah.
There was Charles Du Bois, Warren Du Bois, um, and Zelda, I think. Uh,
Zelda, yes, yes, yes,
wow.
yes. I don't know how I came to know them. I don't remember my mother or my father being there. I
Yeah.
just remembered playing. I remember, it was, I don't know, it was one of the few families that felt like they were really comfortable with each other
Yeah.
and that they were happy to be a family,
Wow. Yeah.
and and that they really loved each other. You got just such a warm feeling when you went there, which was not true of a lot of the other homes, black or white.
Yeah.
And they were an exception to that. I loved them. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Um, yeah. One other person has mentioned them, but I haven't. But didn't really know anything about them. So I'm really happy uh, that you have these memories of them because otherwise I have no idea. I doubt any of them are still around because they were all, like you said, quite a bit older than you. I think the youngest was maybe
Yes.
13 or 14 when you would have moved in. Um, so
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, the boys seemed very grown to me, but they were so nice and very nice to me.
yeah,
Um, and I remember the name Zelda because I hadn't read The Great Gatsby at age 4 or 5, so I'd never heard the name before,
yeah,
and it was such an odd name to me. So when you said Zelda, I remembered immediately. Yeah.
yeah. Wow.
Oh, they were one of the nicest families.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting to see the at least in 1940. That's the latest census that is publicly available, but um, the black families that lived in the coops, there were, people in more like union jobs, like either furriers or things like that. But then you know, the Branfords, the Du Bois. I mean, there's, you know, pretty professional, like you know,
Right,
job.
right. And most of the black families were not involved with the party.
Yeah.
The Branfords were, I always found them sort of intimidating because they were so elegant.
Yeah.
You know, and always dressed as if they were, you know, meeting some friend for lunch at a nice restaurant.
Yeah.
You know, and that would be 9 o'clock in the morning. You would see them looking really, you know, all dressed.
Wow.
And they were, you always got the sense that they were kind of above the fray.
Yeah.
that, you know, that they were just a little bit above all of us. And they were not hostile or anything, or mean or anything like that. They just seemed indifferent.
Yeah.
To what was going on, you know, in that particular complex. And Jackie Branford, you know, I think we talked about this, became a designer, lived in Thailand, and she wrote children's books.
Yeah. Wow.
Which I'm going to buy a couple for a friend of mine, little boy. And I don't know what Paul ever did, but they were quite something. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you have many memories of the Jiggets family?
I don't remember Mrs. Jiggets at all. I remember Mr. Jiggets a little bit. And he was just a very friendly guy.
Yeah.
I liked him. And I liked his two girls also, Jock and Yvonne. You know, Yvonne, I don't know where she is or what happened to her, but you know, she was a drug addict for quite a period of time. I don't know if she's still alive or not. But yeah, she kind of did not land on her feet.
Yeah.
Maybe later on she did. I don't know.
Yeah.
She was so.
And
I like that's a family I liked also.
Okay. Yeah. You know, you mentioned the Dodgers a little while ago. A few months ago, someone whose father helped Jackie Robinson ghostwrite some articles in 1955. This guy lived in the Bronx, and Jackie gave him, you know, a bunch of his papers and things from the Dodgers. It's a pretty small collection, but you know, it's still a collection of Jackie Robinson's papers and papers from the
right.
Dodgers. And in that collection, there's a letter from Lillian Jiggets to Branch Rickey, urging him to draft a black baseball player. And Lillian is the mom.
To drop?
Or to draft.
Yeah, okay. She wanted what?
She wanted to. She was urging Branch Rickey to draft a black baseball player before.
Oh wow!
Before they decided on Jackie or anything, because this was 1943. The letter. So that's the trace of her that I've found so far, and that's a pretty.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Because I think at the time she was a secretary for Ben Davis, who was.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. But
I had no idea.
yeah,
I'm really shocked.
yeah,
I had no idea. Then, I mean, she at least had to have been a very political person.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, this.
At least at that
Um,
time, it sure seems like it. But I haven't found out much else
oh,
yet. But
hold on. Could you hold on? It's my neighbor.
oh, sure. Okay, great. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
That was my neighbor telling me Amazon came yesterday. And, they wouldn't leave the packages with her.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, okay. Well,
Well, yeah, Lillian. I do remember the name now.
yeah,
I can't put a face with the name, but she had to have been very political.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Working for Benjamin Davis.
yeah,
I mean, come
yeah.
on.
I know, I know. But when I saw that name, because I'd seen her name in the census before, but when I saw that name on the letter, this collection had nothing to do with the Coops research I was doing. It just was pure coincidence that it came in, and I thought, oh my God,
Wow.
here's
Wow.
here's the best part of the Coops.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah,
That's so interesting.
yeah,
Um,
um,
yeah.
and
I mean, one of my memories was of World War II.
mm,
Because we had to draw the shades at night,
oh,
and there was a warden in the neighborhood. His name was Tony, and if you didn't draw your shades,
yeah,
he would blow this whistle,
oh wow,
and to remind you that you had to draw the shades.
yeah,
So I do remember that,
mm,
which was actually, I think, scared me more than I realized.
yeah, I bet so. I bet so.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. Do you remember just a couple other people, and then we'll go on to other things?
sure.
Uh, but do you remember? Let's see. Jill Goldstein is her name. I think her daughter was Beverly Goldstein.
Oh my God, I remember Beverly, Alberta. Her mother's name was Alberta.
Whitney. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. Beverly Whitney and Alberta Whitney. I've heard their names
That's
too.
yeah. Um, to the best of my knowledge, um, or the way I recall it, they stayed pretty much to themselves. And Beverly was an only child, and Alberta was a single mother, as I recall. And Beverly played the piano. I remember that. She was a pianist. And I also remember, and this struck me as so odd, Alberta sent her to shul to
Oh,
learn Hebrew, I guess.
yeah.
I don't know. And which I found really, really strange.
Yeah.
And I also remember my father wanted to send me to shul, and my mother said absolutely not.
Yeah.
And she said that they would be mean to me. It's the sense that I got.
Yeah,
That I wouldn't be accepted at all, and I had no desire to go, believe me.
yeah. Yeah.
But Beverly did go. I remember that.
Wow.
But she barely spoke to anybody.
Yeah.
I don't remember her having any friends.
Yeah, one second. I think the UPS guy's at the door. Let me just pause it. I'll be right back.
Sure.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that.
That's all right.
Um,
No problem.
but yeah, sorry to interrupt. So
Yeah, we're talking about Beverly Whitney.
yeah,
Yeah, I have no idea. Do you know if she's alive?
I don't know. She's someone that I'm still trying to find a way to get in touch with, and I have been unsuccessful so far.
Yeah, um, yeah, I don't know who would know because,
Yeah.
as I say, she was so isolated.
Yeah.
I always felt that her mother deliberately isolated her. I have no idea if that's true or not, but that was my sense as a young person.
Yeah.
And wow. Did anybody ever speak to you about Lori Taylor?
Yes. Yes. I've interviewed her the
Darling.
youngest sister in the family, Melissa.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
When did Lori die? Do you know?
I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah.
I was shocked to hear that she died. I
Yeah.
was really, because she's she's younger than I am.
Yeah.
And
I know.
I was really.
Um,
Was she at Melissa close?
Melissa talked a little bit about her sisters, but she didn't go into a whole lot of detail about
Okay.
them. I know that she's the only sister alive now, so I imagine it's,
Really? Her sister died?
yeah, yeah,
They would. Oh, wow.
yeah. So, but she still lives in the Coops, actually. So
Yeah. And Lori never left the Coops, really.
yeah. So
Interesting.
what about Audley Moore? Do you have many memories of her?
I just remember her wearing African dress. That's all I remember.
Yeah.
And she was not friendly with my family. I don't know who she was friendly with. And she was a noisy person.
Yeah.
Very opinionated. I remember that.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether she was trying to get people to go to Africa or what, but it was something.
Yeah.
And she wore African dress. And that's about all I remember about her.
Sure. Yeah, she from what her son Thomas Warner is his name. From what he said, she more or less kept to herself in the Coops. Other than, I think she was friends with Angie. So I imagine they had some heated discussions at times.
They must have, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Angie was the only person she really spoke to. But
Angie knew everybody.
yeah.
I mean, Angie was quite a force of nature.
Yeah. Yeah, Peter Bryson told a story about her peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. At least in his mind, the best peanut butter and jelly sandwich he ever ate was from Angie Dickerson.
She was very good with kids.
Yeah.
I can tell you that she I remember once when she and my mother were still good friends, and we walked over there. My sister was in the baby carriage, and my mother went inside and left me outside with the baby carriage, and I was just pushing it back and forth, and one of the wheels came off, and the carriage toppled. And they came running out, and of course my mother went to make sure the baby was okay. And Angie came over and she gave me this great big hug, and she said, I was terrified I'd be in trouble or they think it was my fault. And she was was so kind. She
Wow.
said, "Don't worry, we know it's not your fault. It's okay." And she was just gave me this big hug. She was just really good with kids.
Yeah.
I don't know how good she was with adults, but she was good with kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Um,
I don't know if she was good with her own kids. That I don't know. But
yeah.
I always and Peter talks about peanut butter and jelly. That I don't remember, but I remember I hated liver.
Mm.
And Angie said I would love her liver because she made really good liver. But I still hated it.
Yeah, her
Anyway.
son Steven has passed now, but of course, but Charlotte, you know, was very, very close with her mom, and is definitely still a little torn up about her mom's death. So, yeah.
I'm really very glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That makes I'm glad to hear that. I never knew Charlotte very well. She was closer to my sister's age, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what did Angie die of? Do we know?
Yeah, it's terrible. She went in to Montefiore in 1981 for just a routine, or not, I guess not necessarily routine, but just a regular foot operation, because she was experiencing some pain in her feet from arthritis and things like that. And the operation somehow got botched, and she died shortly after the operation. I don't know if it's a blood clot or what, but yeah. So
Yeah, that's awful.
yeah. Yeah.
That's awful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Angie was overweight. She was always overweight.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm really glad Charlotte and Angie had such a good relationship. That's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And did Peter's parents hang around at your apartment much?
No, my father would go over there, and I think they had poker nights over there.
Peter
and he would go and play poker, but no, they never. I can't ever remember seeing them in my house. And I didn't know either one of his parents very well. Saul and Babe were their names. And I knew them. And again, Peter was friends with my sister.
Yeah.
He was so yeah. I didn't know them very well. I mean, my main friends were the Jurgens kids, not Paul, because again Paul was younger.
Sure.
But Carl and Eloise, and then the Jameses. Carol, James, and I were good friends.
Yeah.
And Brenda Beatty and I were friends for a while.
Sure.
But I think she blocked me on Facebook.
Oh, no.
I think I'm not sure, but she's a Trump person, and I'm not. And I've written several things, and I think she blocked me, but I can't be sure. But nothing of hers ever pops up anymore, so
yeah,
I don't know.
She's never gotten into that with me, but wow. Oh, yeah. It's sometimes surprising and horrifying who you find out is a Trump supporter. But
yeah, she didn't proselytize to me or anything, and I certainly didn't proselytize to her.
Sure.
But going to her webpage, I saw it. I said, "Oh my God, oh my God, Brenda, what are you thinking?"
Oh boy.
Get a grip.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, her family, Henry and her mother's name was Elizabeth, was it? Betty, and
Betty.
Henry. Yeah, they didn't hang out with the politicos so
Sure.
far as I knew
Sure.
at all. You know, the thing about, you know, I was talking to you about the Du Bois family
Yeah.
and how warm that house was and how unusual that was.
Yeah.
Every household that I went into, and I was talking to my sister about this recently, it was like nobody spoke to anybody.
Oh wow.
There was never any joy.
Oh. Boy.
My house too.
Yeah.
I mean, if I went to the Jurgens household, for example, Carl and Paul, total silence.
Wow.
Every household seemed so quiet. The Jameses, Sharon and Carol James and their family, it was the same thing. It was quiet. And I would be over there. I don't think I ever heard Mr. James ever say a word.
Wow.
I don't think I ever heard him speak.
Wow.
And I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying anything was wrong. I mean, because they stayed married forever.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, until he died.
Yeah.
But that's what the houses, it was so quiet. All the houses were, all the apartments were extremely neat and clean, and everything was put away and quiet.
Wow.
That's my quiet.
Wow.
So odd to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure a kind of stressful environment to be in as a child, just in general. But
Yeah. I mean, I did not enjoy growing up there, I can tell you.
yeah.
I did not.
Did you play around the coops at all?
You mean, what do you mean play around?
Like
Go to the playground?
in the garden or Zimmerman Playground or on the roof or
Yeah.
things like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I would go to the playground a lot and go on the swings. And when I was much younger, they had a pool, and I would go in the pool. And I liked hanging out at in the playground when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And we would take walks in Bronx Park,
Yeah.
a huge park, and we would, walk, and on the roof. I mean, sometimes, my family would go up there and picnic,
Sure.
and the roof was how we traveled, because everybody was on the top floor, right? So there was no point going down and then going up.
Yeah.
So we would just travel by roof
Wow.
to each other's apartment.
That's funny.
And and then you just walk, you would be right there on the top floor.
Yeah.
Which is where all your friends were. You know what they look like, right? You can visualize them with the various sections.
Yes, I can.
And I was, okay. So I was in section BB. And Eloise was a few sections down, so I would just go over the roof to her house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all in, was it the first court that you all lived in, or the second or third?
No, we lived in the third court.
The third court, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was, we were on Bronx, the address was 2860 Bronx Park East.
Okay, yeah.
And if you want my old phone number, I can give that to you too. I've never forgotten it. But
Sure, might as
I
well.
think pardon?
I said, yeah, sure, you might as well, just for records, because
Olamville 53405.
yeah.
And I think we bought it. I think Barker Avenue. Yeah, I can't remember the surrounding streets, but
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
it was a very, very safe neighborhood.
yeah.
And we never locked our door.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And my mother or my father would lock the door before they went to bed at night. That was the only time that door got locked. During the day when nobody was home, that door was unlocked.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
and everybody knew it.
Yeah.
They would send me to the store to get my father cigarettes or to buy the Sunday Times.
Yeah.
And I wasn't allowed to cross the street by myself. And they would say, just ask somebody to cross you.
Yeah.
And I would stand on the corner until somebody came by, and I would say, "Mister, would you cross me, please?" Now, what parent would do that today?
Wow.
Ask a stranger to help you.
Imagine.
I mean, nobody would do that. You'd have to be out of your mind.
Yeah.
But it's extremely safe.
Wow. And I'll ask you about the wider neighborhood here in a second, but to stick with the Coops, do you remember ever seeing any of the clubs? I'm guessing that you were never part of any of the clubs, because I think they were all white at the time, but like the clubs in the basement of the Coops.
I don't even remember them.
Yeah.
And we used to explore the basement a lot. That was part of our activity.
Sure.
Because it was a warren of, and you could get from one court to the other court via the basement.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of exploring down there, and I really have no recollection of the clubs at all.
Yeah. I think it was only in maybe 53 or 54. Chuck Turner and Tommy Warner both told me about a club called the Carmen Jones Club that they helped start, because there were no clubs for any of the black teenagers. Well, I guess Tommy Warner would have been in his early 20s, but most of the people in it were, in their late teens at the time. But that's the first and I believe the only black club that ever existed at the Coops, and it only existed for a few years. And I think it was all men in it, because I think it was Tommy and Chuck, Reggie. I forget his last name, Smith or Williams. I sometimes confuse them. He was part of it, if you knew him ever. It's just a few of the guys. Maybe Tyke Taylor was a part of it too, but I think that's the only black club that ever existed at the Coops.
Yeah, well, 54, I went off to college in 54. I'm surprised Chuck was still around, because Chuck is older than I am.
Yeah.
Did he ever mention an Al Grayson to you?
Yes. I haven't found a way to contact anyone from the Grayson family, but yeah, I've heard the name Al Grayson before.
Yeah. I was madly in love with Al Grayson, and my father hated him.
Oh yeah.
And said I couldn't see him anymore. He thought he was a bad boy, and which actually he wasn't.
Yeah.
But so I had to stop seeing him, and I often wondered what happened to him.
Yeah.
And he and Chuck were very good friends.
Yeah, that's what he said. That's what Chuck said, um, but yeah.
And he doesn't know what happened to him?
No.
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Because he stayed in touch with Brenda,
Yeah.
Brenda Beatty, because I see he wishes her a happy birthday every year on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm really surprised that he doesn't know what happened to Al Grayson. I would love to know. If you find out, let me know.
Yeah.
I would love to know what happened to him.
Yeah, because I know another of their friends. Was his name also Al Percy? Maybe Al Percy. Does that name ring a bell?
No.
Okay, but his first name might not have been Al, but for some reason I have it in my mind that he is. But I know what happened to him. He's no longer around. Tyke's no longer around. So I know some of their friends. Reggie's no longer around. But I haven't been able to find out anything about Al Grayson yet. But yeah, I'll let you know if I do.
Yeah.
And
I mean, Al Grayson just lived with his father. There was no mother there. He lived with his father, and they were not, political. I don't think Chuck's family was political either.
No.
Right. So yeah.
What about you mentioned, a while ago now at this point, that your mother liked to cook. What kinds of foods do you remember growing up?
Meatloaf.
Okay, yeah.
She was just a very simple cook.
Sure.
She worked full time.
Yeah.
So those were the days. It was even before frozen foods.
Yeah.
So, canned peas and carrots, which I
Sure.
hated, and lamb chops, anything that was quick. I mean, on Sunday, she would roast a chicken. That was a big deal. That was, fancy because it was Sunday, I guess. But other than that, it was just normal, USA bland cooking.
Yeah.
When she retired, she got adventurous and made some of the best black bean Cuban soup I've ever had in my life.
Oh,
better than the Cubans make it, and she made some good stuff. But when she was, and I also remember, we didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And because my father was, out of work a lot until he got the cab.
Sure.
But I would remember that there were some nights when we would have pancakes for dinner. And I loved pancakes. And I thought, oh my goodness, Mom is in such a good mood. She's giving us pancakes. And I found out many years later it was because she'd run out of money. And she said she always had flour and milk so she could make pancakes.
Yeah.
But I was always very excited by that. I thought that was just, great. And yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
What about music in your household? Was music a very big part of?
No, nobody. Me. Because I liked certain music, and I would, but there were no records in the house. Any of the records that were in the house, I bought.
Sure.
And there weren't many of those. I mean, I didn't have a lot of money, and the money I had, I made babysitting, and at that time it was 25 cents an hour.
Yeah.
So how much money I had. And no, there was neither one of. Oh, I know. Now that's not right, Jane. They were, I don't remember them. Yeah, they both of them loved Samson and Delilah, the
Oh,
opera.
yeah.
And where that, I don't know how that happened, but they would play, so we must have had a record player.
Yeah.
They would play Samson and Delilah.
Oh, wow.
They loved that opera, both of them. So that's the only music I could ever remember them playing.
Wow, yeah.
Oh, we had a record player, because now I remember I had Peter and the Wolf. I used to listen to Peter and the Wolf, so we had a record player.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
Um,
but there wasn't a lot of music in the house.
I see. Yeah. And do you remember in the Coops instances of kind of more, I guess you could call it like violent expressions of racism? There was obviously the daily racism that just kind of, was always there. Beyond that, though, like anything more, I guess, visceral or uh, than that happened at the Coops.
Not that I can remember.
Yeah.
Did my sister have recollections of anything violent? Because I don't. Yeah, I don't.
There was one interaction that stuck out with her. I think someone closer to her age. And in the surrounding neighborhood, she had stuff to say about that. And I'll actually ask you that next, in the kind of wider neighborhood when you stepped outside the Coops.
Yeah. See, yeah. Until I was a teenager, the neighborhood was all I knew.
Yeah.
And then when I went to high school, and I don't remember how I met these guys, but the guys that I dated, they were all black, and they lived on Prospect Avenue.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Which was pretty much a black neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I remember one in particular, his name was Ernie. I don't remember Ernie's last name. And he used to throw house parties in his basement.
Sure.
And I would go to his house parties, and this is where I met other guys. And when I went to high school, the majority of the students, I went to Christopher Columbus.
Oh, okay.
Alice went to Evander Childs.
Yeah, she told me.
I went to Christopher Columbus, and there were very few black kids in Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
The majority of the kids were Italian, and they were quite hospitable. I remember one of my friends there was Margaret Sirocco, and her father owned a grocery store. And at lunchtime, we would go to the grocery store. The father was always extremely pleasant.
Sure.
And I went to high school with Anne Bancroft's sister. Whose name was, Anne Bancroft was originally Anna Italiano. And her sister was in my class, and her sister's name was Phyllis Italiano. And I met her years later because I was working for the United Negro College Fund, And it turned out that her husband, Phyllis Italiano's husband, John Wetzel, was my boss. And I found out he was married to Phyllis Italiano, and I met Phyllis at some function that we had. And I said, "You gave up a beautiful name like Italiano for Wetzel?" And she said, "Gladly," she said, "because I got so tired of telling people Italian with an O." I said, "Oh, I get it." But Christopher. Violence. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I didn't encounter it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it began to become, the expressions of racism began to become a little more violent in the neighborhood, maybe after you moved out.
After I left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was always there, but by 1963, that White Castle on Allerton and White Plains.
Oh yeah, I know. I remember the White Castle. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a picket organized by the Congress of Racial Equality in the summer of 1963, and yeah, people with Confederate flags and KKK hoods and all kinds of, there were like neo-Nazis showed up to counter protest, some from the neighborhood, some from Westchester County, some from further away, but that's probably when things really got pretty bad. But yeah.
Does Chuck remember that? My sister, does she remember that?
No, cause I guess if I remember correctly, I guess your sister had already moved out of the Coops by then, 1963.
No, see, no. He
Um,
hadn't, and neither had I, actually. After I graduated from college, I came home.
Yeah.
So I was around, but I don't remember that at all. I have no recollection of that.
Some people.
But I was pretty much out of. I mean, yeah. I was pretty much out of the neighborhood in my head at that point. I didn't hang out there. I didn't. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like the Taylors attended, so Melissa remembers, and in fact, she says family lore is that the first sentence that she read was "police line, do not cross," at the picket line.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I imagine, maybe people who were a little younger than you who ended up.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
But yeah, you can still see pictures of it, and if you look at the pictures, I think probably people's natural assumption is that this is happening in Mississippi or Alabama, but
right
here in the Bronx.
Right.
But
yeah, that's so interesting. And who were these people? They weren't from the Coops. I mean, I can't. I mean, as racist as the Coop was, I can't imagine them.
I mean, my impression is that they're primarily like some of the Italian teenagers in the neighborhood, but I also know some of them came from further away because there were more people who were who were civil rights protesters who were arrested than there were neo-Nazis and KKK, of course.
Well, that's the way of the United States.
Absolutely. But some of the neo-Nazis who were arrested, like they were from Virginia and like further away as well. So it became kind of a gathering point for, you know, all of the most violent racists within, you know, a couple of miles. Because it went on for a couple weekends, I think. So so yeah, but yeah, anyway. And what about your elementary and junior high schools? Which elementary and junior high did you attend?
Well, everybody went to PS 96.
Sure.
And then I went to PS 89. That was a middle school.
Sure.
And then I went to yeah, I don't, you know, have many recollections. I never much liked school.
Yeah.
I don't, you know, nothing stands out.
Yeah. Did you participate?
I mean, I can just remember, you know, going to, this was eventually New York City closed down public schools on Jewish holidays.
Yeah.
But when I was going to school, they didn't. So, you know, I'd practically be the only kid in school, me and Eloise. In PS 96.
Yeah.
You know, there was nobody there. It was a ridiculous waste of time. But other than that, so.
Do you remember any of the teachers treating you differently because you were Black?
Now, I got in big trouble in PS 96 because I don't even remember what grade this was. I think it might have been in 4th grade. Mrs. Similevsky. See, the thing, yeah, all right, let me start. I could always read.
Yeah.
And there was one other girl, and I was very good friends with her. Her name was Ruth Taub. She was a little white girl. And she didn't live in the Coops, but she lived near the school. And she and I were always the best readers in the class. And I could remember the two of us getting tested over and over and over again because we could read so well.
Yeah.
And nobody ever taught me to read. I just somehow knew how to read.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I always felt very special because I was such a good reader.
Sure.
And so if, you know, somebody else was reading out loud and they didn't know a word, the teacher would say, Jane, tell them what the word is. And I would tell them what the word was. And to this day, I remember missing a word. I was in 4th grade. The first time I ever missed a word when I was reading out loud. Wow. And I remember the word. The word was length.
Okay.
And for some reason, I couldn't read it. I was mortified, let me tell you. Anyway, that was Mrs. Similevsky's class. And what happened was she gave us an assignment to write an essay on why I love America, something like that.
Yeah.
So I went home and said, I have to write this essay on why I love America. And my father went apeshit. I mean, he went crazy. So he practically dictated this thing to me. And it talked mostly about racism in the United States and, you know, that sort of thing. And I went and I handed in this essay. Oh boy. And all I can remember was, I don't remember what kind of grade I got on it, but that essay went to the principal.
Wow.
And I can remember Mrs. Simileski. We were online somewhere, and she was talking to another teacher, and she was pointing at me. And it was apparently quite a scandal in the school. And I think my father came in and talked to the principal. And then I got called. This just lasted over a period of days.
Yeah.
And then I got called down to the principal's office, and her name was Mrs. Middleton. Oh my goodness, all these names coming back to me.
Oh, yeah.
And she was lovely. And she said something like, I agree with what you wrote, but she said, believing that doesn't make me a communist. It was something like that.
Yeah.
And she was perfectly pleasant. I would say more than just pleasant. She was actually quite nice.
Yeah.
And then that was the end of that.
Wow.
But that caused quite a stir in the school.
I bet.
And then I can also remember, oh yeah, there were things like, you know, you would learn all these songs. And like, oh, Susanna, right, or Frere Jacques, or something boring. But they would teach, I learned Old Black Joe, and I learned Swanee River. And I can remember being asked to read some short story. I think it was a Mark Twain short story. And, you know, you had to stand up in class. And I was reading with another girl, Miriam. I can't remember Miriam's last name, but I remember Miriam.
Yeah.
And within the text was the word nigger.
Oh. And
I said to Miriam, we're not going to say that word. Yeah. We're going to say Negro.
Yeah.
And she did that, and that's what I did. The teacher never commented, never said anything. So yeah, I mean, there was, you know, stuff like that went on.
Sure.
All those Stephen Foster songs. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was the era of. I don't know what the public schools are like now, but you know, America is the greatest country on earth. Everything is wonderful here. We're all so lucky to be here. It's a democracy, and everybody's equal, and anybody can be president.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. That was, you know, that was the line.
Yeah.
And I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be president. I mean, don't hand me that bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, that's even very in the grand scheme of things, modest proposals to you know, consider the history of slavery in the U.S., like the 1619 Project, are met with the fiercest pushback by you know, by a lot of public school systems still. So
yeah. Let's keep our head buried in the sand.
Yeah.
I know. I know. It's typically American.
Yeah.
You know, it's yeah.
Yeah. And with the schools, did you participate ever in any of the after school programs, whether music or
No.
or other things like that?
No.
No.
No. No.
Yeah.
No.
Um,
Mm-mm. I was, kind of a cynical little kid,
yeah.
and um, this business about gold stars. They would give you a gold star if you did something right. I thought that was ridiculous.
yeah. Yeah.
And I was just a cynical little kid. That's what I was.
I don't blame you. Me too, actually. So, yeah.
I have a friend here. He has died, but he was a cynical kid also, and always questioning everything.
Yeah.
And he said when he got to college, and he was condemned for it, of course, in high school as being, rebellious, nonconformist, and all those bad things. And he said when he got to college, he said he learned it was called critical thinking. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
No.
Yeah.
The public school system did not appreciate critical thinking.
No, not at all. Were you ever singled out, whether by teachers or other students, for your parents' political beliefs, if they knew them?
No.
Yeah.
No, they didn't know.
Yeah.
And no. Mm-mm.
Alice told me that when the Rosenbergs were executed, she stood up and told her class, what a terrible thing this was that had just happened. And she said she had a target on her back from that day on.
Yeah, I did the same thing, but I don't remember. But that I was not. She was younger, 7 years younger.
Yeah.
So I did the same thing when it came to the Rosenbergs. I said something about it.
Yeah.
And I don't remember any repercussions.
Yeah. I guess you would have been in high school?
But I think I was in high school at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can remember also talking about racism in the United States in one of my classes.
Yeah.
And talking about Paul Robeson. I remember that.
Yeah.
And I don't remember any repercussions from that.
Sure.
I mean, so yeah.
Did your family ever go to other parts of New York, like for, concerts or any kind of entertainment or cultural events or anything like that? Or you stuck pretty close to the Bronx?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of money.
Yeah.
And later, I mean, my mother loved the theater, but this was much later in life.
Sure.
They didn't, the big entertainment in my family was movies. We would go to the movies. And and my mother would always take me to a Christmas show at Radio City Music Hall.
Oh, sure.
And she ruined that experience because the first show, which was like 9 o'clock in the morning, was the cheapest show. So we would, on my Saturday day off, I'd have to get up early to go to Radio City Music Hall to see the Christmas show.
Yeah.
But she was very big on taking me to see the Christmas show. But that movies, that was, the major entertainment. And I think my parents went to house parties.
Sure.
But no, but later in life, my mother traveled the world.
Wow, yeah.
She went to countries, and she went to Afghanistan. You know anybody who traveled to Afghanistan? This was before the Soviet invasion.
Yeah.
That's how long ago that was. But yeah, the only country I think she refused to go to was India, because she said she didn't think she could take the poverty. But she's been all over the world. But at that time, there was no money.
Yeah, for sure.
She did take us to Mexico when we were, early teens.
Yeah.
But she loved to travel. My father didn't like to travel. I think once she dragged him to Italy, he was not happy. Traveling was not his thing, but she insisted that he go. So they went to Italy, but no. Mm-mm.
Yeah. That just reminded me. Chuck mentioned to me at one point that he thought in the back of his mind maybe that Saul Bryson and your father might have fought in the Spanish Civil War, but he couldn't tell me for sure. And I'm just wondering if you ever heard anything about that.
No, my father was in the First World War.
Yeah, and he probably would have been a little too old to go over during the Spanish.
No, he wasn't in the Spanish. No, he was not in the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
I don't know about Saul.
Yeah.
But I definitely know my father was not in the Spanish Civil War.
I think Saul was born in maybe 1910 or 1911. So.
My father was born in 1898.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, glad to clear up that. Then.
I'm assuming his parents are both dead. Pete's parents.
Yeah, they are.
Right.
They are. So, I think the UPS guy is back. One second. Let me pause this again. I'm so sorry.
Sure, not a problem.
Okay. But yeah, Peter's parents have both passed a while ago now, I think, and
right.
He's on a mission to find some recordings of his father because his father was a singer, and was actually in one of the earliest productions of Porgy and Bess.
Wow.
But
yeah, I vaguely remember that he was a singer. Yeah.
But yeah, we'll I realize we've been at this for a while, and I want to respect your time. So I really only have one more question for you, and then I'll ask if there's other things you'd like to share that we haven't touched on.
Okay.
Yeah. So what either from growing up specifically in the Coops or in general in the Bronx, what about that do you think most shaped your life going forward?
Well, certainly, I learned a lot about subtle racism.
Yeah.
And I am finely attuned to it. And that has remained with me all my life.
Yeah.
And I have little tolerance. And the other thing, of course, were the politics.
Sure.
I am a progressive. I'm not a communist. I've never been a communist, but I'm certainly a progressive, and feel very intensely about democracy and preserving democracy and democratic principles. And so I take that, from growing up. in that environment. And I think I think I have been during my lifetime a bit of an iconoclast.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from that background.
Sure.
And I can't think of much else. I mean, for those things, I'm quite grateful.
Yeah.
It would have been nice if it had been a less hostile atmosphere,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
and more fun. It was not a whole lot of fun going on there.
Yeah.
And I think it was a very intense environment, and I think it probably would have been better if it had been a little less intense for a kid.
Yeah, a little
you
more.
know,
Yeah.
a little more fun-loving, and but no, it was always very serious, and anyway, so yeah, that's
And are there other parts of your life, either when you were living in the Bronx or after you moved away from the Bronx, that you'd like to talk about?
no, I mean, not really.
Okay.
I've had good work experiences, and excuse me, happily retired in Mexico,
Yeah.
and thinking about, actually, I've been here about 21 years,
Mm.
and I'm thinking about moving back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I am. A couple of things happened. One was Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt I needed to be part of the effort
Yeah.
to get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And then the pandemic, and my inability, my daughter had to have surgery,
Mm.
and I couldn't get the hell out of here
Yeah.
because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that really bothered me. That really, really bothered me.
I bet.
So for those reasons, and I'm getting older, and well, I am older. I am old. I don't like to admit that. And the healthcare is better in the United States. I mean, we can complain about it forever, but it's better than it is here.
Yeah.
If you can afford it, if you know.
Sure.
And I do have good medical coverage from my last job, which I will have until the day I die. So
Oh, that's good.
yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those reasons, I am considering I will miss this place a lot.
Yeah.
But I am thinking it may be time to leave.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well,
And I would love to do some sort of political work in the States, and especially around this whole issue of voter registration, which just makes me crazy.
yeah. No,
That
me too. Me too.
that that this is going on. So this is I mean, I think democracy is really on the brink.
Yeah.
And I don't like that.
Yeah, yeah,
It worries me a lot.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in state after state, uh, there's, the uh, basically uh, uh, whiteifying of the voter registration rolls,
Oh yeah.
and penalizing any form of protest. I mean, in Florida, I think, if I remember correctly, you can't even call a cop a bad name without facing some type of felony charge. Maybe now, even, I forget, but it's pretty recent.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. No. What's happening is just horrible.
yeah,
Um, and yeah. Well.
um, I
So
know.
anyway, for all those reasons, I'm thinking about moving
Yeah,
back to the States.
yeah, um, yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, luckily, there's more and more people uh, fighting. It seems like every day, but there's such a need for more and more people to join. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean. Yeah. I mean. Yeah.
but
There are lots of things that give me hope about the future of the country, because there are so many people who are really doing battle against these forces that are trying to destroy the country.
absolutely,
And I mean, there is a real progressive movement in the United States. Just the response that Joe Biden has gotten, and God knows, I mean, he's not a lefty, but he's doing some really good stuff
yeah,
that he would never have done, years ago.
I know.
So, there's some good stuff going on, but there's also a lot of bad stuff, and we can't be idle around this bad stuff. There's got to be protested.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's uh, very clear that you and your sister both took the fighting spirit of your parents to heart. But from speaking with both of you, you also have such a tremendous sense of humor, and those two things going together, you can't stop it.
Listen, you cannot survive in this world without a sense of humor. You
Yeah,
just can't.
yeah,
And my daughter also has a wonderful sense of humor.
yeah,
Humor is really important.
abs- absolutely, um, absolutely. Well, yeah. Is there anything that you would like to say to anyone who listens to this in the future, as far as things that you've taken away from your life, important lessons that you think might help others in the future?
No. I Yep. No, I don't have any words of wisdom for anybody.
Oh
People
well,
find their own way.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sure when people listen to this, they'll find plenty of wisdom interwoven in everything that you've said anyway. Um, so yeah, but I really appreciate you taking all
Sure.
this time to share your memories, and really so many vivid memories. I mean, I don't know how you remember names of your teachers, because I can't remember most of the names of my teachers all at this
You
point.
know, I know it's really weird, but somewhere there's a picture of my kindergarten class,
Yeah.
and I could tell you the names of almost every one of those kids that
Wow.
were in my. I Don't ask me how I remember, but I do.
Yeah.
Of course, Don't ask me what I ate for breakfast because my short-term memory is not so good.
Yeah.
But my long-term memory is really good.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So, so yeah, I really appreciate this. I mean, you know,
Sure.
you've added
Yeah,
you've added so much.
if you have any other questions, feel free to call.
Okay,
Okay?
great. Well, thank
And
you.
let me know when the other interviews are available. I would like to hear what some of the other people had to say, actually.
I'll let you know. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now.